But I think the biggest thing for me that I've changed my mind on since I wrote the book in 2019 was carbohydrates, and then in connecting with that, the ketosis and ketogenic diets. So when I wrote the Carnivore Code, and this is humbling, this is what we all do, is we write books, and then you put your thoughts into cement, you freeze your thoughts in kryptonite, and then you change your thoughts and you think, oh, the book, it's just not a living document. But when I wrote the book, I was of the opinion that carbohydrates were not great for humans and was sort of looking at the literature differently. And over time, I learned personally in my own life, doing a carnivore diet of meat, organs, and fat and salt for a year and a half, that including carbohydrates in my diet improved my health from there. So my whole story is that I was eating kind of a paleo diet, had really bad eczema, which I'd had my whole life. Getting rid of vegetables and all plant food significantly improved the eczema, so much so that in the last 4.5, 5 years since I've been on this more specific path, I haven't had any flares of the eczema that are significant at all. That was a big deal because I had massive eczema on my elbows, my wrists, my hips, so much so that I really couldn't even wear pants easily. It would get on my shirts. I couldn't do jujitsu because I had eczema on my knees and it was getting infected. So getting rid of vegetables really helped with my eczema. But then I learned after a year and a half that I was getting such bad muscle cramps, heart palpitations, sleep disturbances. My testosterone was kind of going down. Right now it's around 700 or 800. I've included carbohydrates in my diet for the last 2.5 years. But at that point it was going 450, 500, it was significantly lower. And my sex hormone binding globulin was creeping up. So I had electrolyte issues. And what I realized was that I'd been thinking about insulin wrong. I'd been thinking that I needed to keep my insulin low all of the time. And to be fair, on a carnivore diet, my fasting insulin was low, 3.5, 3.0. And I thought incorrectly that if I ate carbohydrates, my insulin would spike and that would be a bad thing, right?
After today's video, I want you to check out Bubs Naturals. If you're consuming collagen protein, which honestly you probably should, you want to have ones that are clean and simple. The thing I like about Bubs is there's no flavorings, it's simple, it's instantized, it mixes epically well, but they are also all about a good cause, okay? 10% of all of their proceeds go to charity. So the whole idea behind Bubs, besides providing good products, is all about supporting our fallen heroes as well, which is why Bubs was formed in the first place. So I take Bubs with me when I'm on the go because they have really convenient sticks. They have it in a tub form. They also have awesome MCT powder as well. So if you're trying to add it into coffee, it makes it a one-stop shop. But collagen is also tremendous for sleep, and I've talked about that in other videos. Anyhow, I popped a link down below. You can use that code Thomas20, and that'll save you 20% off whatever you want from Bubs Naturals. Again, the code is Thomas20, and that link is down below in the top line of the description.
What I realized, and I wasn't taught this in medical school, was that insulin spikes after you eat carbohydrates are actually healthy for the human body for a variety of reasons. So insulin is probably something else I've changed my mind on, carbohydrates and insulin. What I realize now is that your body needs an insulin signal after a meal when you eat carbohydrates to signal to the kidneys to resorb and hold on to minerals, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. So the massive, profound electrolyte problems that people get on long-term ketogenic diets are almost certainly due to a lack of insulin signaling at the level of the kidney. There are various levels of kidney physiology upon which insulin is going to act, but people in the ketogenic space, I think, are well-intentioned, that they're trying to hold on to minerals by including massive amounts of salt in their diet, but it just doesn't work because you need an insulin signal at the level of the kidney to hold on to those things. So the first thing I did when I sort of transitioned off a ketogenic zero carb, quote unquote, carnivore diet was include honey in my diet. And the first couple of days I felt a little weird because I was physiologically insulin resistant. And then your body kind of adjusts to this, my blood sugar spikes normalize. And if I eat honey today or a few years ago after I had adjusted to having the carbohydrates back in my diet, my blood sugar might go to 130, 140, 150 milligrams per deciliter. But I don't worry about that because if you look at the actual shape of that curve, it comes back down to a baseline very quickly, within the hour for sure. So this is normal human physiology, and we should not fear glucose spikes in a metabolically healthy individual. It's going to go up, it's going to come back down. That's normal, and that insulin signaling is healthy for humans at so many levels. It's healthy for our hormones, it's healthy for our brains, it's healthy for the production of glutathione and the resorption of minerals. So that idea of insulin being all bad all the time and including carbohydrates in my diet, that was a huge, huge thing. And now we know, there's tons of research that I just didn't see at that point that I was sort of blind to about carbohydrates for athletes, carbohydrates post-exercise. We just worked out. I have holes in my shorts now from the weight belt, and this weight that I was using has ripped a hole in the front of my shorts here. And carbohydrates post-exercise are so clearly shown to improve performance. Carbohydrates overall are shown to improve all sorts of metrics in humans: testosterone, recovery, sleep, all kinds of things. So those are two big ones for me from the outset.
Now, on the cramping side, I've got a question. As far as, because I've experienced that when I'm low carb, right? I'm very, very prone to cramping, which as someone that does a lot of endurance stuff, it's problematic. Like if I'm backcountry or anything like that, I was just doing a long trek and ran into a huge cramping issue, even though I'm not super low carb anymore. I guess I'd still lowish carb. And I would argue that it actually takes time to actually like recover from some of that insulin issue that you have with the kidneys. But the question that I've always had, and maybe you know the answer, since protein is insulinogenic, can you get some resorption of the minerals through the insulin spike with protein, or does the glucagon cancel that out in that case?
I mean, you get some, it's just nowhere near. If you look at the amount of insulin and the level of insulin you get with carbohydrates, it's much higher than it is with just protein. I mean, you get some with protein, it's just not the same as a carbohydrate spike. And so people in communities that are fearful of carbohydrates will say, look at how much insulin you're getting. And that's good, you need that. And so people understand this also, like when you don't eat carbohydrates, you become insulin resistant. This is not the pathological insulin resistance of diabetes, which is different physiology that I can describe. This is the insulin resistance of physiology, basically historically, evolutionarily, this is starvation insulin resistance, meaning that you are physiologically insulin resistant. Your body is saying, hey, spare the glucose. Any glucose you're getting, spare that for the brain, the adrenals, and the gonads, and maybe the red blood cells. Don't put it in the muscles. That's physiologic insulin resistance, and that's what you see in people who are low carb or zero carb or keto, and that's why the first time someone like that eats carbohydrates, they may feel very strange, or the blood sugar may go up. This is why a woman who is low carb will fail a glucola test in her pregnancy, because that is physiologic insulin resistance. And I actually have come to believe that's not a good thing. I don't think we want to be physiologically insulin resistant. It is a historically, evolutionarily adaptive thing for extreme situations, but I think that humans do better, and I've come to see carbohydrates as a signal of abundance. I mean, if you go to spend time with the Hadza or the Maasai or the Samburu or the Khoisan, I mean, these tribes invariably seek carbohydrates and they celebrate it. They don't think, oh, I've had 100 carbs today already, I'm not gonna eat this. When I was with the Hadza, we found a beehive and they just went off on this thing. I mean, I got a big chunk of beehive and ate it with the larva in there and the honey, and it's amazing. And the three Hadza guys that I was with were probably ate 60, 70% of the honey in this hive, and then shared a little bit with their comrades when they came back. Say, hey, we found a hive, here's a small amount for you guys. But they'd eaten a ton of this stuff. So historically, I think humans had massive exposure to carbohydrates whenever they could get it, as much as they could get it.
Yeah.
They didn't fear it at all.
I would agree. I mean, I definitely feel like, to say that carbohydrates aren't evolutionarily correct is invalid. I think there's always access to them at some point, one way or another. And
humans are seeking them. Yeah. If we don't have them, we're seeking them. If we can't find them in berries, I didn't mean to cut you off, but if we can't find them in berries, if we can't find them in honey, we're going to find them in roots. Yeah. It's a piece, it's interesting. It's just so intuitive and simple. We're looking for animal protein. We're looking for nutrients and organs. That's clear. We're always eating the whole animal. But the next thing, I think, in tandem with that, we're also seeking carbohydrates as wild humans. We've forgotten what wild humans look like because we all, except for maybe a couple thousand people on the planet today, live as semi-domesticated humans. But it's very clear. I mean, if you look at the Hadza, so there was a PhD researcher who actually spent a lot of time with them and gave them surveys of these nomadic tribes and said, what are your favorite foods? And there were 5 foods that were their favorite. So there was meat, there were berries, there was baobab, there was tubers, and I forget the last one, I'll think of it in a moment. But honey was invariably the first thing that they wanted. Both men and women ranked honey as number 1. And men said meat as number 2. Women ranked berries, baobab, and tubers, I think all about the same. But in both groups, the roots were sort of the last thing that they wanted to eat.
Wow, man, that's wild.
But both of them that was the favorite thing for them, was honey.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. It's delicious.
They celebrated it more than anything, right? And if you look at these people, there are tons of studies of them, of their cardiovascular health. They have insulin sensitivity, which is amazing, which is exemplary. They're not insulin resistant. They're not diabetic. They're not obese. So
my own anecdotal experience, I don't eat an abundance of carbohydrates, but I've added honey and fruit in, and my insulin sensitivity has improved on my lab work. So, I mean, it's...
By fasting insulin, which is perhaps the most clear metric you could ever use. That's unquestionably an improvement in insulin sensitivity.